Hello and welcome to Mastering in the Box. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Spotify loudness normalization levels for 2021. Hi folks, Smudge here and welcome to Mastering in the Box. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Spotify loudness normalization levels for 2021 and what considerations we need to take into account when mastering our tracks. As per normal, if you want to know more about digital mastering, then make sure you hit that subscribe button below and make sure you tick that bell and select all to receive notifications on all of our videos moving forward. And if you want to support the channel, there'll be further links and where you can support the channel through buymeacoffee.com, where it's just buy me a coffee, or supporting the channel through the membership scheme. Any monies raised through the buymeacoffee.com account is all going back into Mastering the Box to provide even greater content for you. So let's get on to today's content. So loudness normalization, just for anyone who doesn't know what loudness normalization is, it is a process that is used by the streaming platforms and it's designed purely to create a consistent listening volume for their users on the streaming platforms. So it doesn't matter whether you're listening to a song as part of a playlist, an album, or as a single, they will use algorithms to normalize the audio to ensure there's a more consistent level to have a greater listening experience for the user. So what has changed in terms of the loudness levels for Spotify? Well, firstly, it's the system they're using to calculate the loudness normalization. They used to use a system called replay gain, but now they've more formally adopted the ITU 1770 standard, which is the loudness standard for the United States of America. Now, whilst this is a legislative standard and it is regulation in terms of broadcast medium, for music, it is not statute, it is not regulation. So they are very much using their normalization in line with the ITU 1770, but it's subject to change as with all streaming platforms because it is not regulation or statute. In terms of the loudness standards, there are two standards that we normally look to adopt when it comes to mastering audio, and that is the ITU 1770, which is the loudness standard for the United States, and also the EBU R128, which is the loudness standard for Europe. Very, very, very similar. They measure very similar levels, but it's just two different standards depending on where you are in the world. So another thing we need to consider here is how Spotify calculates their loudness normalization. And whilst they always used to use replay gain, their recommendations were all very much based around the ITU 1770 and the EBUR 128, in that they would recommend a loudness level of -14 LUFS integrated for the streaming platforms. However, you were always able to turn loudness normalization off in the settings. Now it has become much more granular, and we'll cover that in greater depth. Before we go further, I do just want to place one small tiny caveat here, and that this is very much a first thoughts video. I'm not going to go into great comparison in relation to other streaming platforms. I only found out about this late on yesterday, so this is very much going to be my first thoughts and my first opinions around how we can use this or any considerations we need to take into account now when it comes to our loudness standards for streaming platforms. How does Spotify adjust loudness? Well, it goes on to say that they adjust tracks to -14 dB LUFS according to the 1770 ITU standard. Now, once again, this is now confirmed that what they were doing, but it was actually their recommendation beforehand. So even though they were using replay gain, they did still recommend a -14 LUFS standard. So this is just clarification and confirmation they are now adopting that formally. They normalise an entire album at the same time, so any gain compensation doesn't change between tracks. Well, this is very important because if you master the entire album or EP, and if you want to ensure you've got that dynamic change in between the tracks, then that won't be affected. However, it does say that they adjust individual tracks when shuffling an album. So if you shuffle an album, of course, it's not going to be in the format that you wanted when you mastered the album or EP. So by shuffling an album, then normalization will apply. And this also happens to affect playlists. So if you're listening to tracks from multiple albums, e.g. listening to a playlist, then loudness normalization will apply. And this is very important. And why is it very important? Because this is where the levels will fluctuate between how you listen to the tracks on your streaming platforms. This is not new, but minus 14 LUFS is not set in stone, and this is something I want people to kind of understand. It's their target figure that they recommend. However, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be minus 14 LUFS, because you're going to have different songs at different levels depending on whether it's on a shuffle or on a playlist. It depends on how you listen and what other tracks you listen to, depends on what the actual normalized level is going to be. So it's not exactly bang on minus 14. It will fluctuate depending on how you listen to the track. So this is quite interesting, this next part, positive or negative gain compensation. So this gets applied to a track while it's playing. So this is effectively the normalization piece. Negative gain is applied to louder masters. So the loudness level is minus 14 dB LUFS. So it lowers the volume in comparison to the master. So no additional distortion occurs. So on this basis, if you master your track to minus 10 LUFS, a negative gain will be applied so that the level is minus 14 LUFS. Okay, positive gain. This is very interesting. Positive gain is applied to softer masters, so the loudness level is minus 14 dB LUFS. So they consider the headroom of the track and leave 1 dB's worth of headroom for lossy encodings to preserve audio quality. So let's take a look at the example here. So if you master your track to minus 20 LUFS and it has a true peak maximum of minus 5 dBFS, they will only lift the track up to minus 16 dB LUFS. So why is that? Because they're allowing 1 dB's worth of headroom. Okay, so if the difference between where the true peak maximum is and where they want to leave the ceiling, so when we talk about streaming platforms, we normally talk about a ceiling of around -1. So effectively, there's 4 dB's worth of difference between the true peak max and the ceiling that we want to allow for the coding process. Therefore, they will take your track, your 20 dB LUFS, and they will reduce it by 4 dB's. So they won't even reduce it to minus 14 LUFS, it will be minus 16 LUFS. So it's just something to consider, and this is something why I would always recommend using a level of at least minus 14 LUFS, because if you don't, yes, they will turn your track up, but they won't turn your track up fully to the minus 14 LUFS level. So it will still be 2 LUs quieter than something that was mastered to over and above minus 14 LUFS. Now, this is something that is very, very important, because it says about premium listeners can choose volume normalization levels in the app settings to compensate for a noisy or quiet environment. So what does this mean? So if you set the loudness level to loud, it will normalize to minus 11 LUFS. We set this level regardless of maximum true peak. We apply a limiter to prevent distortion and clipping in soft dynamic tracks. The limiter is set to engage at minus 1 dB with a 5 millisecond attack time and a 100 millisecond decay. So given this, if your track is between minus 11 and minus 14 or below minus 14, they will raise the level up to minus 11. The limiter will be applied. There'll be a ceiling at minus 1, but it will use a 5 millisecond attack and a 100 millisecond decay. So whilst they're recommending a target of minus 14 LUFS, if someone chooses to listen to that song in loud mode, they will push the track up, but they will apply limiting, which could, and I stress could, apply compression. So that's something to consider. If you use the minus 14 LUFS integrated level, and if someone listens to that track in loud, there is potential for compression to occur. Normal stays at minus 14 LUFS, and quiet is minus 23 LUFS. The minus 23 LUFS, that's understandable because that's very much falling in line with the broadcast standards for TV, radio, commercials, etc. It does give you a few mastering tips. So loudness normalization means that we don't always play your track at the level it's mastered. It does say target your loudness level of your master at minus 14 LUFS and keep it below minus 1 dB true peak max because that is going to allow for some headroom for the lossy formats decoding process. So the coding process, it has the potential to add some gain, so they're recommending if you're mastering to minus 14 LUFS, leave a dB's worth of headroom, so it will take into account any of the encoding process and any potential gain that will be added as part of that process. Finally, it goes on to say that if your master is louder than minus 14 LUFS, make sure that it stays below 2 dBs on the true peak value to avoid extra distortion. So you'd want to set your ceiling to minus 2 dBs, and it's because louder tracks are more susceptible to extra distortion in the transcoding process. Whilst that very much may be true, I kind of, there's part of me that wants to kind of take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because I think if you look at the music that's been released over the last 70 years, I think quite a lot of that music is already going to be louder than minus 14 LUFS integrated. And if it sounds good on those songs, yes, it may add in some extra distortion. Is it going to affect the track? Maybe, maybe not. It's something that we need to consider. Okay, so that's the loudness normalization standards in 2021 for Spotify, but what does it actually mean in practice? And if I'm being honest, whilst this is my first thoughts, this does raise more questions than it answers. And I'm saying this from a few different angles. My first thoughts are, if you look at what they're saying around how they are normalizing the audio, there's not even a consistent process amongst all of the different mediums that they offer. So if you think about this from the perspective of, if I'm listening to Spotify on my computer, I can open the Spotify app and the volume will be normalized. But if I used a web player, it won't be. So there's no consistency amongst the different platforms or the different mediums that they're using. So I think that's my first question is, how can we use this to ensure consistency when they're not applying that consistency across all of the mediums they offer? But I think the main considerations here, why I'm very positive around the fact that they're applying the minus 14 LUFS in accordance to the ITU 1770, I think we also need to consider that not all streaming platforms do use the same levels. They don't all use ITU 1770, and I'll be featuring this in a video coming really soon, because there are lots of different levels and different guides for the different streaming platforms, so there is still no consistency. But the thing that's really kind of getting to me at the moment is this new level system. So you have a loud, a normal, and a quiet level that premium listeners can choose to normalise between. And whilst I accept that that is good for the listener, I am just querying their mastering tips here. So they are recommending a target of minus 14 LUFS and keep the true peak level below -1. If someone wants to then listen to the song in loud mode, so they're saying that they recommend the target of minus 14, but they're going to allow people to listen to it at -11. But if they're listening to it at loud, they're going to apply a limiter, which potentially then may cause compression. So my counter query with this would be, well, as a mastering engineer, why would I target -14? Would it be not more sensible to target -11? And the reason I'm saying this, because if I want to master a track to achieve a great listening experience for the end user, why would I use -14 as the target level if I know that if someone wants to listen to it loud, then the master may sound more compressed than what I'd intended? Would I therefore not target -11 as the target and then make sure it sounds good at -11? And if they turn it down to -14, it will sound good at -14. If they turn it down to -23, it will sound good at -23. It sounds counterintuitive to use -14 as your target, but then allow people to listen to it at -11, knowing that they're going to apply a limiter, which may cause some compression. Certainly something food for thought, and it's something that I'll certainly be digesting. Let me take a brief look at this now in an example. So here I am inside of Studio One, and I've got a client track that I'm working on at the moment. Unfortunately, I can't play you any of the tracks, I don't have permission, but I just wanted to show you this example in practical terms. So the top track, there is no mastering processing going on except for limiting. So all I did is I got the track up to -14 LUFS integrated through the entirety of the song. And I did that by just adding a limiter. I treated it as if I was mastering to -14 LUFS by using a ceiling of -1. Threshold is 0 because I didn't want to add in any additional compression over and above what the standard limiting would do, and I boosted the gain to get the overall LUFS on the integrated measure to -14. I then rendered that track, and this is what you see here. So this is the rendered track at -14 LUFS integrated. I then duplicated that track below, and this is going to be the example to -11 LUFS. Now, if we look at the Spotify guidance, they've suggested they would like for -11 LUFS that they will apply a limiter using a ceiling of -1. They will then use a fast attack and a release of 100 milliseconds. So that's exactly what I've done. And as you can see with the level meter, I managed to get it bang on -11 LUFS integrated throughout the entirety of the song. But just take a look at the limiter here, and I really want you to focus here on the gain reduction. And let me just play a brief snippet of the song. You won't be able to hear it, but you'll be able to see exactly how the limiter is reacting. So as we can see here, the gain reduction is consistently coming out at -3.75 dBs. So yeah, I think this is the thing. The loud level is good to give people that option, but if they're going to use a limiter with the ceiling of -1 using a very fast attack and a 100 millisecond release, if you master your track to -14 and then allow people to listen to the track at -11 LUFS integrated, you need to factor in here that the limiter will be reducing the overall level by, you know, in this case, almost up to 4 dBs. So there's almost 4 dBs worth of gain reduction if someone was to listen to the track mastered at -14 LUFS, but in the loud setting inside of Spotify. So that's it for this week's video in terms of the loudness normalization figures for Spotify in 2021. And just as some closing thoughts, I still really need to kind of digest this further and make a bit more of an informed opinion, because my initial thoughts are, I still think it's folly in 2021 to use -14 LUFS on an integrated level as your target for mastering. And the reason I say this is there's no consistency amongst the streaming platforms. Some will use -14, some use -16, some use -1 dB as the true peak figure, some use -2. So until we really get a consistent level across the whole of the industry, then it just really kind of makes no sense to use -14 as a base level. And if you then think about it further, and even inside of one streaming platform, it's going to differ depending on whether you listen to the song as part of the album, whether you put it in shuffle mode, or whether it's listened to a part of a playlist. There's still no consistency amongst that platform either. And then once again, if you then go into how Spotify works, for example, that they will normalize everything used through the app, but they won't normalize things through the web player or through TVs or external speakers and things like that. So we're just lacking some real consistency here amongst the industry. And then once again, I just want to go back to this whole piece around the loud setting. And I think if you give people the option to listen to something at loud, normal, or quiet, I don't think the quiet's ever really going to be used much at all. I think people will listen to it in either normal setting or loud. And we know people's tendencies to think that louder is better. So if a lot of people do start to listen to songs in loud mode, then once again, with this example here, I don't even see this as a reasonable explanation to use -14 as your target. It makes more sense to me to get your song sounding as good as possible at -11 than it would do at -14. Because if you master to -14 and if someone listens to it in loud mode, you know there's going to be compression applied through the limiting that they're going to use. So yeah, I think for me, the jury's still out. I would like to do a further video on this, take some time to digest it and really compare it against the other streaming platforms and make a bit more of an informed decision. So That's enough of what I think. What do you think? What do you think that this kind of tells you about the way that modern mastering is going and the loudness levels? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd be really kind of keen to understand your thoughts. Would you still choose to master to -14? Now Spotify have confirmed that they would, certainly recommend that to be used as a target, or do you still think that actually this doesn't make any change at all? You still, master to whatever loudness you see fit? Let me know because I'd be really keen to understand your thoughts on this topic. So I hope you found this interesting. If you want to know more about digital mastering, as per normal, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. Make sure you tick that bell and select all to receive notifications on all of our videos moving forward. And once again, if you want to support the channel, there'll be links in the description where you can support the channel through buymeacoffee.com, whether it's just buying me a coffee or subscribing to the membership scheme. Any support will be greatly appreciated. So all that's left for me to say is I hope you'll keep safe and well. I'll see you in the next video coming real soon.